I've got to thank Steve Rennick for presenting such a great overview of the structural framework and the regional stratigraphy. It makes my job a lot easier. So I get to just come straight in and talk about the stratigraphy of the intrusions that host the Nova-bollinger nickel-copper sulfide ore deposit. So this work, I do need to acknowledge a lot of people. So a lot of IGO geologists, both present, former, and serious resources geologists have put a lot into this, but more so Valentina has put a lot of work into coming up with the stratigraphy of the intrusions, and I kind of just piggyback on the end of it. So here again is the cautionary statement that Steve presented before. Just because we're an ASX listed company, we have to present this. I don't really have a lot of time, so I'll just move straight on. So my talk, basically what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk to this slide for a few minutes, and then I'm just going to basically be a tour guide and take you through a couple of representative drill holes through the sequence at Nova, and then take you through a couple of cross sections down below in the lower Nova, which has the ore deposit associated with it. So I'll just get straight into it. So this stratigraphy is basically being put together by using the integration of both objective and subjective data. So the subjective data is treated with a lesser degree of confidence than the objective data, and the subjective data is greater than 2,500 drill holes that have been drilled basically in this eye feature. And then they were logged by serious resource geologists, IGO geologists, and CSIRO geologists. So there's that, and then treated with a sort of greater degree of confidence is the objective data, which includes greater than 2,200 chemically relogged drill holes and 9 hyperspectrally logged holes. And this has been done very recently with a company called TerraCore, which provides a service of basically mapping out at the mesoscale your main mineralogy that you see in felsic and, importantly, mafic and ultramafic rocks, which can do it using both the shortwave infrared and the longwave infrared. So in terms of the overall intrusion, a lot of it is spatially related at Nova in terms of our terminology. So this here is what we refer to as our upper Nova intrusion. And then this one here, unimaginably, is the lower Nova intrusion. What we're seeing here is this long section from west-southwest to east-northeast. So it's outlined here, displayed on this plan view of the doubly plunging synform. And then you're seeing here the lower Nova chronolith, which is basically 1.3 kilometers until it's eroded here at surface. And it gets up to about 450 meters in width and can be up to 140 meters in height. So in terms of the ore bodies, this here is where Bollinger is. It's not quite shown very well on this long section. It actually comes out further and blows out a lot more towards the south, so out of the page. And then here is the Nova ore body. And what we see with the lower Nova intrusion is that it swells and then pinches and swells. And this is related to the fold architecture that Steve was talking about before. So the lower Nova intrusion is basically orthocumular olivine websterite, sort of conduit intrusion that basically where it blows out at both Bollinger and at Nova, you see there's a lot more of feldspathic orthocumular lersites in there. And around this is a thin sort of gabronoritic olivine-bearing rind around there. Where you see it at Bollinger, above there in the sort of upper Nova intrusion, you see lower sort of mafic zone, which is texturally the orthocumulates or very texture in nature. And this is probably referring to a basal reversal of the upper Nova intrusion. So jumping a little bit, but I'll talk about the upper Nova intrusion, upper zone, which is dominantly mesocumulate, sort of noritic to gabronoritic, modally layered intrusion. It's modally layered on the sort of decicentimeter to meter scale with either or gabronorite or olivine norite in there. And then you pass into this thicker sort of centralized zone of dominantly ultramafic lithologies, typically sort of mesocumulate or heteroadcumulate textures. They're quite heavily serpentinized in patches. And within there, these ultramafic intrusions themselves are modally layered on the sort of decicentimetre to metre scale. And within these modal layers, you see more mafic components. So you see olivine norites and olivine gabronorites, which are mesocumulates. Between this sort of taxidic zone and the middle sort of ultramafic zone, you get this mesocumulate sort of olivine norite, which is subordinately got modal layers, decicentimetre sort of scale of olivine gabronorites. And what kind of links the upper Nova intrusion to the lower Nova intrusion is this ultramafic portion here that's above the Bollinger ore deposit. And this year we see it contains relative more abundance of sulfides in it, and it forms a sort of sub-economic mineral resource, which is referred to as C5 by our geogeologists. And this off section, so towards us to the south, is linking towards the more ultramafic component at Bollinger, and then towards the north off section, it links to this centralized ultramafic portion here. It's kind of in between both the upper Nova and lower Nova in terms of cumulate textures. So it's more typically a mesocumulate to tetrad cumulate, but you do get portions of there that are also orthocumulate in nature. So really, without further ado, I'm just going to get straight into a couple of drill holes and talk to them. So these here are the two that I've selected, and basically I'm just going to drive you through a nice section of here. So basically what I've got here is a schematic of the upper intrusion passing into the C5 area, which has more sulfides, and then the lower Nova intrusion. And what you're seeing here is the RGB image of 4 meters of core. And then here, this is from the TerraCore hyperspectral scanning, which is long wave infrared. It's a false color image. So basically what it's showing on this is where it's more orangey sort of colors here, they're more silicaceous sorts of minerals. So in this instance, it's quartz. And here we're getting these white dots. These are actually magmatic sulfides. So these just basically allow you to have a really neat way of showing sulfide and in a lot of cases, assimilant textures and later veins and pegmatite development. So this one here is the long wave infrared dominant mineral map. And what it's showing is pixel by pixel mapping of which mineral is dominating the hyperspectral, basically spectra, in this case of long wave infrared. So this here is not actually showing you modal abundance. It's basically just showing that this is a clinopyroxene dominant sort of signature. So it's not a clinopyroxenite, it's actually an olivine gabronorite, which you see there. And then here what you're seeing is a more noritic rock. So it's an olivine norite, not an orthopyroxenite. Throughout both the upper and Nova intrusion, you do see a fair degree of assimilant products in there. These are being sort of partially digested, in some cases restite sort of phases. And you see the local country rock of carbonaceous peelites, graphitic peelites. You also get carbonates in there as well. And locally, you also see carbonate melt inclusions, which are quite intimately associated with these. Yet felsic pegmatites develop throughout both the upper and lower intrusions, and around C5 and particularly at lower Nova, these pegmatites actually host remobilized magmatic sulfides, which is quite typical of what you see in the lower Nova sequence. So getting on now, we're going into this centralized ultramafic zone. It's typically olivine websterites to leusollites that dominate this zone, which you'll see on the next slide. They're heavily serpentinized. In spots, they're feldspathic. You often see they're mesocumulate in texture. They're heterode cumulate with orthopyroxene sorts of orchiocris. On the sort of decicentimetre to metre scale, you get these more mafic units. So here it's olivine norite, but in other places it's olivine gabronorites. Going here, now we're into the leusolite sort of part of the middle sort of centralized zone of the upper Nova intrusion. You see again, it's heavily serpentinized here. It's leusolitic in component, and you're seeing these later sort of calcite veins which relate to groundwater movement. Again, you see these modal layers of mesocumulate olivine norites to olivine gabbronorites. And then as we go down, now we're into this sort of mesocumular mafic lower portion of the upper intrusion. So it's dominantly an olivine norite, but what you do get in there are these sorts of decicentimeter zones of, for lack of a better word, clumpy clinopyroxene rich zones, as you see there, and that's one there. And this is quite a typical sort of feature that you see in both the upper and lower Nova intrusions. And I'm going to offer a sort of somewhat explanation for this of why we think this sort of texture, we see it here. And moving down to this sort of basal, sort of reversal, typical unit that we see at the base of the upper intrusion, you get this textural change to this varied texture, taxidic texture, typically olivine gabbronorites, but you also get noritic parts in there, as you're seeing on the dominant mineral map. And you're seeing again that sort of clumpy, lumpy sort of nature of the clinopyroxene in there. You're seeing here on the false color that you're getting greater sulfides in this section, which again is referring to what we refer to as a sub-economic C5 resource. We're now into that ultramafic sort of portion that you often see above Bollinger ore body. And here it's more typically a meso sort of cumulate, lurzelite, olivine websterite, and you sometimes approach sort of orthocumulate sorts of textures. Again, another clump of clinopyroxene that's shown on this dominant mineral map. One thing to point out is you get a lot of mixed spectra between plagioclase and pyroxene, depending on grain size. So this ultramafic here is probably looking to most people like a gabbronorite or a gabbroic rock, but it's actually just a mixed spectral signature. Now here we're transitioning between the upper Nova and the lower Nova intrusions. It's quite taxidic here. And what you're not seeing in there is actually any chilled margin. So the upper and the lower intrusion are linked via this C5 sort of area. Also in there, you're seeing these local pegmatites. And here you're seeing a really nice pegmatite relationship to this extensional vein that's filled with nickel copper sulfides, and these are remobilized veins. Now jumping across to a different drill hole now, and now we're getting into the sort of typical lower Nova sequence, which hosts the Nova-bollinger ore deposits. So it's a sort of typical B-shaped profile. Here it's more exaggerated at Bollinger, where you see a lot more basically assimilation. So you see a lot of assimilation, especially at the top in this hole. So this mafic sort of component gets blown out quite significantly, and it's most likely just a top reversal. And then as you come into this ultramafic, you eventually get down, and it does come back into gabbronoritic sort of base in most cases, but not in this one here. Here, this is basically showing you a P-like class, so it's that image there that's locally basically being disaggregated and assimilating into the melt, and you see a lot of sulfides around there. Here you're seeing a lot of different sulfide textures, so you're seeing more heavily sort of net sulfides here, essential sort of veins, and then disseminated to locally blebby sulfides. This here is more your typical gabbronoritic part of the lower intrusion. You see nice blebby sorts of sulfides. Occasionally these are capped by silicates and carbonates. And really, again, you're seeing this sort of clumpy nature to the clinopyroxene, and you're seeing a whole lot of different sulfide textures in there. As we go into the ultramafic, a lot of what you see at both upper and the lower Nova intrusions is that,
1 minute.
Yep, that's fine. Is that it's mostly orthopyroxene rich. So you're seeing basically more your websterites are nearly orthopyroxenites, and occasionally you see magmatic layering in there. So the clinopyroxene story is most likely related to the ingestion of carbonates and basically the addition of calcium into the melt, crystallizing clinopyroxene over orthopyroxene. So here's a nice basal sulfide sorts of textures that you see. I'll just jump straight forward as I'm running out of time, but here's this sort of typical leopard sort of texture, massive sulfide textures that you often see in Bollinger. And just going between there, you see nice conceptually zoned intrusion, lasolitic core surrounded by websterite and gabbroite rind. Then it pinches and then swells again at Nova. You see there's a lot of sulfide infiltration into the country rocks. And then as you get to Panhandle, they turn into apotheoses or fingers, kind of like what you see with Norilsk. But what we're not implying here is that it ends here, just rather there's an erosional level and we don't have any understanding of where it goes. But what it does tell us is that the flow is from Bollinger, most likely to Nova. And just the take homes. So the lower Nova is a causative intrusion for the Nova-bollinger ore deposits. It's tronolithic in nature and it's linked to the upper Nova intrusion. And it represents a great example of conduit-related magmatic nickel copper sulfide system. If anyone has any questions, shout out in question time or get in touch with me on my email. Thank you very much.